of this extravaganza of incredible post-election madness. So let's jump right back into the rotation. Once again, I am Gary Stein, the political director of Suncoast NORML. Right above me is our executive director, Chris Cano, who is coming to us from above the Beltway, where he hits him below the Beltway. And in my upper right-hand corner there, we have Carlos Angel Armida, our deputy director, our engineer, and the head of Chillum CBD and Shroom Gallery. And in the lower right-hand corner, we are very honored to have the deputy director of National NORML, Paul Armentano. Paul, how are we doing today?
We're doing okay. It's good to be here.
And where are you right now?
I am located outside of Washington, D.C.
And you had a pretty big week over there. I was amazed that the hearing came off right after the elections, considering everything else that was going on. But they had a big hearing this week, a subcommittee meeting. It was focused lasered on cannabis. What was it all about?
Absolutely. Members of the House Oversight Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Justice were the ones who called this hearing. You're right. At a time when Congress is very busy, members of the House made time. They made about 2.5 hours to discuss cannabis policy reform. And I was honored to be among one of the witnesses that was invited to speak to the committee and respond to their questions. And I think it really indicates a couple of things. One, it shows that for many members of Congress, this issue absolutely is a priority. Two, it illustrated that on this particular issue, members of both parties are willing to reach across the aisle and work in a bipartisan manner. That's going to be very pivotal going forward because we are going to have a divided government where we're going to have Republicans leading the House and Democrats leading the Senate. Third, and maybe most importantly, the tone and the tenor of this hearing really illustrated just how much things have changed in Washington, D.C. when it comes to talking about and moving ahead with cannabis policy reform. I've been doing this 30 years. I referenced this in my remarks to the committee. Look, if we go back to 1996, not all that long ago, the leader of the House at that time, Newt Gingrich, he sponsored a bill to impose the death penalty for those who import more than 4 ounces of cannabis into the country. Congress was actually discussing executing people for possessing small amounts of marijuana. That's where we were then. Today, we're where we are now, where we have members of Congress, members of the House, not only talking about, but advancing legislation to repeal the federal prohibition of cannabis and largely echoing NORML's messaging when advocating for that change in policy.
Oh, so that's where Duterte got it from.
Absolutely.
I was wondering where the heck he came up with it. Isn't it interesting that Newt Gingrich, who's rarely goes above the top, made such a statement? But we've been dealing with things now since 1971, and the Schaefer Committee said, let's go ahead and make it legal, but make it still contraband if you carry it in the streets. And Congress hasn't been able to move anything. So after all this time, do you see Congress finally moving forward? Because we've had a couple of false starts, but we've got a heck of a lot of bills that have come through over the last couple of sessions, although most of them never got out of committee except for a few.
You know, it's funny because the chairman who was holding the hearing, one of his final questions to me, he said, Paul, do you think we have the ability to get this done? Can we get this over the line? And I'm thinking, you're asking me? I think you're probably in a much better position to know. But at the end of the day, it is hard to get legislation, any legislation, to the president's desk. I think we all know that. I think that is why about a month ago or so now it is, the president took his own executive actions, limited as they were, to try and get the ball rolling. And I think really try to jumpstart Congress to work together to get this done. The House has passed a number of bills, significant changes in marijuana policy. Unfortunately, virtually all of those have gone to the Senate to die. That is really where the gridlock has been in the past. We know we have certain public promises from the Senate leader that he and his colleagues intend to move some language, some legislation in this lame duck session, but they only have a handful of days to do that. I don't like this idea of pushing things off till the very end of the session. Lots of unforeseen things can happen at this point in time, but I do think there is a general good faith effort going on among leadership to at least pass some level of marijuana policy reforms before the end of this year. That likely includes some changing the banking legislation, potentially providing some money to states so they can further facilitate expungement, and perhaps including some additional social and equity language. I know that's certainly leadership's goal. Whether it gets done remains to be seen.
Are there any bills that are headed towards the lame duck session that might have a chance of getting some steam?
Well, absolutely. Like I said, there is a package that is certainly being discussed that includes banking reform, that includes providing grant money to states involving expungement. There's a bill with regard to loosening some of the very restrictive rules that exist right now that limit the ability to study cannabis for the purpose of drug development. That bill actually was sent to the president's desk today. So there has been some movement, and I foresee that there will be some movement in the coming weeks.
I've tasted that stuff from Irv Rosenfeld. I have actually tasted better corporate boof than the stuff they sell at University of Mississippi. And I've heard Sue Sisley complain about it all the time. It says it's freeze-dried crap. And
yeah, absolutely. But keep in mind, even using that freeze-dried crap, look at the results that we have when scientists have studied that freeze-dried crap and they've actually given it to patients. They see positive results. Just imagine the results they'd be getting if they were using a better quality product.
That is true. That's absolutely amazing. Now, the president's announcement was really stunning for all of us. How much of it do you think was a political ploy, and how much of it is it, a thing that you felt would actually be implemented?
So this was the fulfillment of a campaign promise that the president had made. He was quite vocal ahead of the election in saying that if he was president, he was going to take these particular actions. And this was something we had advocated for, something we had lobbied him to do, to use his presidential pardon power to issue these sort of mass pardons. Now, I've heard some people be critical of the president and say, well, you know, a pardon isn't the same as an expungement. And there are only a limited number of people eligible to receive these pardons at the federal level because most arrests occur on the state level. That's all true. But the executive branch only has limited authority. The president is not the legislative branch. He cannot, with the signing of a pen, eliminate or repeal marijuana policy. He can't create expungements at the state level or even at the federal level. So I think it was terribly important for the president to follow through on his pledge, for the most powerful elected person in this country to publicly castigate federal marijuana prohibition as a failed priority, to issue pardon relief to about 6,000 individuals, and to bring further attention to this flat earth policy that we've had since 1970 that inappropriately classifies cannabis as a Schedule I controlled substance. Keep in mind, as part of the president's edict, he initiated the requisite agencies to once again take part in a review of cannabis's Schedule 1 prohibitive status. Now, I'm not particularly optimistic that that review is going to either be timely nor lead to the sort of outcome we want. But once again, by doing so, I think it puts a lot of pressure on Congress, who has to know that as the legislative branch, as the entity that enacted these terrible federal policies in the first place, the burden and responsibility is really on them to fix the mess they created. It's not on the president, and it's not on some bureaucratic agencies that arguably would take years to move this process forward if they do it all.
Well, I did notice the fact that, number one, none of the things on his cannabis announcement have gone before a federal judge to be blocked yet, which is kind of nice. But
Yes.
What was accomplished in this meeting? Because I have a feeling we're not going to have a meeting like this after the next session starts and the next Congress starts, because there'll be a whole new leadership team in the House.
That's very possible. But, it really does remain to be seen. I think one of the reasons this meeting was held when it was held was the fact that Representative Mace, who is a Republican, is likely her legislation that is going to be the vehicle in the House going forward when Republicans take over. Just as when the Democrats controlled the House, the MORE Act, the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, which was a Democratic-led bill, was the vehicle. Now we're going to have to pivot. Republicans are going to be in charge. They're going to be in charge of the committees. And clearly, if they wish to move a cannabis reform bill, it is going to be a Republican-backed bill. This was a great opportunity to discuss the merits of that bill and strengthen our relationship with the representatives who are largely going to be the ones who, again, are moving this issue forward in 2023 and beyond.
I heard that Pete Sessions once again proved that he's rarely tethered to reality. But I heard that we did get some good comments out of the committee and things that are actually forward thinking. Is that what you saw?
Absolutely. And, look, kudos to Pete Sessions for ostracizing himself, for showing the American public what sort of people, what limited minority of the population actually still advocates for prohibition. If Pete Sessions wants to be the poster boy for keeping marijuana illegal, so be it. If his vitriol is to be the justification for keeping marijuana illegal, so be it. He exposed himself to the world, the reality that the perpetuation of stigmatizing and criminalizing responsible adults who use cannabis is based on ignorance, it's based on bigotry, and it's based on hatred. And I'm glad he decided to take 5 minutes and show the world the true face of the prohibitionist.
Well, if you guys want to see exactly what Pete Sessions said and what Nancy Mace, who, by the way, was on our show not too long ago and had a fantastic conversation, very impressive. If you want to see that whole hearing, Paul gave us a link. So, and we will be broadcasting it this next Sunday. Is it Sunday, Chris? That we're going to go ahead and replay it so you guys can hear it for yourself. So kick back, grab yourself a blunt and a cup of coffee, and enjoy the hearing.
Well, Paul, I have a question for you. You mentioned, the world's, seeing right now what's going on in the U.S. Congress and everything displayed for everyone to see. What other countries are really leading the way where we've lagged behind, in research and in making sure that patients are getting access to this medicine for affordable prices?
So that's a really common question I get, and it raises a lot of issues and a lot of sort of misunderstandings about the state of the science with regard to cannabis. It's going to surprise a lot of your listeners, I'm sure, when I tell them that the United States is the world global leader in cannabis science and cannabis research. There's not even a close second. Now, it may not be reflected in the federal policies and in a lot of the narrative surrounding cannabis and what we know and what we say we don't know. But at the end of the day, the overwhelming majority of science surrounding cannabis and what we know about cannabis and its safety and efficacy comes from research done right here in the United States. That even includes FDA approved clinical trial research using whole plant cannabis. Now, there are other countries that certainly have more well-established, evolved, and developed medical cannabis systems. Israel certainly comes to mind. There are tens of thousands of Israeli patients that use cannabis under the authorization of their physician, and there's a number of different cannabis products, whole plant cannabis products that are available for use in that country. This is a very mainstream issue in Israel. There's no particular stigma or fringe element associated with the use of medical cannabis there. Canada obviously has had a medical cannabis program regulated through Health Canada for about 20 plus years. They've had adult use access for about the last 4 or 5 years. But despite that change in policy, Canada for many years really lagged on actually producing clinical cannabis research that we could learn from. Same with the Netherlands. Yes, cannabis is available, but they were certainly not a world leader in cannabis-specific research. I would dare say they were behind Spain and a number of other countries that took looking into the efficacy of the plant far more seriously.
Well, Paul, following up on that, is this research coming from the private sector or is it coming out of American universities?
It is generally coming out of academia, but those universities are generally applying for money and using federal dollars to help pay for this research. Look, it's very difficult I shouldn't say it's very difficult, but this is a very different line of research. Look, most research on medical efficacy of products is funded privately. It's funded by pharmaceutical companies. And there's an obvious reason why. They're looking for a return on their investment. They're looking to bring a product to market and then make back all of the money they had to spend on the front end. There is no return on investment right now in the United States for medical cannabis, for plant flower cannabis. Therefore, there's no incentive, particularly from the private sector, to do the sort of research trials we would generally see done if this was some sort of proprietary formulated compound. So fortunately, and I mean this, fortunately, state governments and the federal governments for decades now have largely been the ones funding the research that we have. The state of California has funded dozens of controlled clinical trials looking at the safety and efficacy of cannabis in patients. The state of Florida funds research. The state of Colorado funds research. The state of Connecticut funds research. The state of Pennsylvania funds research. That's why we have the research we have.
I always wondered how you could trust the research coming out of University of Florida, considering the fact that they have Kevin Sabet on their faculty.
You know, I hear claims like that all the time. And, you know, the fact is there is quite a division, I would say, between who may be on the board of some of these groups and what the scientists are doing and what they're publishing. You know, again, we can look at something like the CMCR, which is the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research in California. It's a conglomerate of a number of different universities, including UC San Diego, UCSF, and UC Davis, a number of schools. They've published very valuable research looking at the use of cannabis in patients with HIV, with neuropathy, with diabetes, with sleep disorders. Regardless of who may serve on the boards of those institutions, who may currently be among their administrators, the fact is it's solid research, it's published in peer-reviewed journals, and it is moving our issue forward, and it's allowing us to substantiate the claims that we've heard from patients over the last few decades.
Okay, Chris, Carlos, do you have any other questions for Paul?
Well, Paul, I just want to say thank you to all the hard work that you've done over the many years at NORML. Just the way you've helped compile research as well, and help create a resource that other chapters can go to that really can disseminate this information. You enlightening us here on the show and enlightening our listeners about the cutting edge research that is happening, and hopefully someone sees this today and they want to take up their own research projects. They want to study it. I mean, for me, that was something that I did in my master's program at University of South Florida. Is I wanted to examine cannabis prohibition as a policy. I wanted to do a comparative analysis of what states are getting it right, and I wanted Florida to get it right. And for 5 years now in Florida, we've continued to work, and we're going to continue to work to push a patient-centric agenda. As we see reform happening throughout the country, what do you see as how we maintain a patient-centric medical system while there's also a multi-billion-dollar adult use market that is now, really starting to take hold. How do we as advocates, recenter the focus? Because a lot of times there's a lot of talk about, revenues and taxes, and people get excited in the public sector around that. But all in all, I mean, this became something because it needed to be a legitimate medicine for people. And to this day, it still has a stigma, even being a legitimate medicine in our state.
Yeah, absolutely. NORML was founded under the belief that there needed to be an advocacy group for the consumers. And that was our focus then. It remains our focus now. And I think that focus now is more important than ever, because while there may be additional advocacy organizations playing in this space or operating in this space, they're not operating this space to represent the consumer. They represent other interests, whether they're commercial interests or the interests of a niche group. They're not speaking on behalf of the consumer. And patients, in fact, are consumers, or arguably our most important consumers, and their needs ought to be prioritized. And their needs are oftentimes very different than the motivations and desires of adults who are using cannabis just for recreational or social purposes. So I think it's very important. I'm not necessarily in agreement with all of my colleagues on this, but I'm of the personal belief that these are two different markets, and they shouldn't be collapsed into a single market. Because again, we're talking about different products for different needs and different motivations for use. And I think that those markets ought to be treated and regulated separately because of those reasons. And obviously, we should not be looking at patients as even a potential source of new tax revenue. That is absurd. It's insulting. It's repulsive.
And I hope that things get better for us from here on in. I know there's a lot of concern and confusion right now in regards to these novel cannabinoids being derived from hemp and whether they should be regulated or not, because a lot of them popped up because of the too stringent regulation on the actual THC normally coming from the plant itself.
Well, that's the law of prohibition, isn't it? That through prohibition by criminalization, an outgrowth of that is the creation of a new line of products, and products that arguably are more potentially harmful than the original product that was the government or law enforcement were trying to prohibit. I share your concern about a lot of these novel cannabinoids, not because I particularly think cannabinoids are dangerous, but because I am skeptical with regard to the practices with respect to how these products are produced. I'm concerned about their purity and their quality, and the market's entirely unregulated right now. People can say what they want about these products. They can put any labeling on these products. They can produce them however they want. And that is simply not good policy. It's not good at the end of the day for the consumer, who deserves to know exactly and precisely what they're getting and has assurances that they're getting a safe, pure quality product. Right now, that's not the case.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because it reminds me of parallels of alcohol prohibition, how soft drinks became so popular during that prohibition era, and then think about where we were 100 years ago and where we are now with obesity rates, diabetes. That mainstream sodas are killing people, and that was the alternative that they created alcohol. And so the point is that I think to be made is, just legalize cannabis, re-legalize it, let people get safe and affordable access to it, and we don't have to worry about novel cannabinoids markets and such.
Yeah, this is an artificial market. Yeah. It only exists because the public actually wants cannabis, and in some parts of this country, they still can't access it.
Yeah. One more quick question. I know you got to go. What year are we going to have federal legalization?
Well, as I told Congress on Tuesday, my business card says deputy director. It doesn't say prognosticator. Basically, everyone who's ever tried to make this prediction has been wrong. I don't wish to follow suit. I will just give you a cop-out answer. We are going to have the repeal of prohibition when a majority of the House and the majority of the Senate send a bill to the president's desk and it's signed into law. I don't know when that's going to be, but I know we're a lot closer to that date today than we were even a few years ago.
Well, I guess we have to ask Nostradamus to go back and take a look at his pan of water and figure out what he can figure out for us then. Paul, thanks for coming by. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Paul. You're welcome back anytime. Anytime.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, as we move forward, I feel optimistic. Paul really did give us some real insights there as to where things are headed. But he also laid out the fact is what it's actually going to take to get us over the finish line. And so it harps back to the things that we talk about every single Sunday. And it seems like this is a soapbox in many ways for us. But the truth is that without you, our listeners and people who follow us, getting involved, being active members, and engaging your legislators, things aren't going to change. It's not enough just to vote. It's not enough just to sign a petition. You actually have to get your hands dirty and make things happen. Carlos and I were just talking about this during the break. We've been at this since 2014, and things have changed tremendously, but they've not changed to the point to where, the mission is done. The mission is not accomplished. And what's missing right now is each and every one of you. We need you to get motivated. We need you to get involved. We need you to join us. Gary is one person, and Gary can corner people in Tallahassee with the best of them. But it's imagine having hundreds of you joining us for a lobby day and how that changes things, where, legislators welcome us into the office and there's not enough room in the office for everybody to sit down. This is the type of level of engagement that we need if we're going to push things over the top, because once people get elected, once the election die down like it is now, the legislators themselves need to be held accountable. They have to be reminded of why they're there, who put them there, and that they're public employees of each and every one of you. And they're not there to be lords and control their own fiefdoms, but rather put them in there to represent you and to get what you want done. And if cannabis reform is something that you want done, if protecting your civil rights is something you want done, if the ability to grow at home is something that you want done, then become a NORML member. Join Suncoast NORML.
And remember a world with 100 of me. And do you really want that?
Of all shapes, sizes, races, persuasions.
Fits all, believe me.
Yes. We want as many people as possible to join us in Tallahassee for lobby days.
I want as many Garys as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm not in favor of cloning Garys, Carlos. I'm anti-clone.
All right, peace out, guys. Have a great Thanksgiving. I don't see you before then.
And make sure before you go that you sign up and get your tickets for the Best Blunt in the Bay competition. We have a limited amount of judge tickets still available. Also, if you want to enter in a team of 4, you and your compatriots can go ahead and see who's going to be able to have the best blunt rolling competitors as a team. And, of course, you'll be taking on the defending champion, the Weed Whisperer. So I'm pretty excited for this. It's Thanksgiving weekend at Chillum.
I bought my referee jersey today.
Yeah, I'm excited.
I'm gonna be the referee. I'm gonna got my whistle, and I got a yellow flag.
Yes, yes, yes. I love it. I love it. I love it. I think it's going to be an amazing time. I know the last one was awesome. It was good for folks to be able to be back, especially with all the lockdowns and everything. And, Thanksgiving weekend, folks will be in town. So if you just want to come on by, we have general admission available. General admission is free for all of our Suncoast NORML members. So if you haven't renewed your membership, by all means, come on down. If you need to pick up your membership pin and card, you can do so by stopping by Chillum anytime during normal business hours from 11 to 11, and they're happy to have you there.
See the address right there, 1714 East 7th Ave, Tampa, Florida.
That's right. And so, again, on Thanksgiving weekend, Saturday, November 26th, it's going down. And you know what? People give Uncle Joe, Sleepy Joe, a lot of crap. I giving him crap, but it was said that his pardons, that his executive order was, essentially the electrical spark to get things resuscitated. And I'm happy to see that. I'm hopeful that we can work with the Republican members of Congress, especially our ally like Nancy Mace, to get the States Act passed through the House. And then, hopefully the Senate, Democratic Senate can conference and get something done in the next year. I would like to see cannabis reform put to bed before we go to the 2024 elections and the instability of what can happen with a new president, new Congress, even then. So right now, having the Senate Majority Leader still being the Senate Majority Leader and being the sponsor of the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act gives us a lot of optimism and hope, and having strong allies in the House and having the state's bill sponsored by Nancy Mace it's going to make a big difference. And big news today, in case folks haven't heard, Nancy Pelosi is stepping down as the Democratic leader, especially since she lost that. And also Steiny Horner, who's the number 2 guy behind Pelosi, is stepping down. So there'll be big changes for Democrats in the House among their leadership. Hopefully we can have a newer generation that wants to put cannabis reform to the forefront of the agenda. Will be beneficial for everybody. So
right.
we'll see everybody in the rotation. So
to say one last time that I love you, Kano.
I appreciate you. I love y'all, man.
Everybody in Florida that's pushed for cannabis legalization, no, I haven't eaten any of my mushrooms. I just love you guys. All right. So I just wanted to say that there's plenty of people here in Florida that have been fighting, and we're gonna keep fighting, and we'll get cannabis legalized, and we'll do mushrooms together. Bye, everybody.